I mean, first of all, how much has the Ukrainian resistance to the Russian army and the ability to fight back, how much has that come as a surprise to you? Because it certainly come as a surprise to Putin.
Well, I think the context is, of course, that this is the 9th anniversary of the war in real terms. Russia or Russia's sort of militias invaded the Donbass in 2014. So Ukraine's had a long time to learn, particularly not just in battle, but in terms of cyber warfare and information warfare. But what we do know is, of course, the Ukrainians are very, very quick learners. And since 2014, they've been trained and equipped and helped and instructed by the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom in, modern warfare and modern doctrine. So, the context is actually just wider than a year of battle. But the really interesting thing is the Russians haven't learnt. They're much, much slower on the uptake. And I think that's the sort of traditional Russian viewpoint that quantity is their way of trying to swamp a battlefield, whereas the Ukrainians, they're far more tiny population, far smaller army. And they've had to learn, and they've embraced high-tech solutions far more than the Russians. And that reflects so well on their armed forces. They are the most experienced armed forces in combat today.
Peter, people will say now we've moved into a war of attrition. And what are the ways this war can come to an end? Because ultimately, that's what we want to do. So how would you say we need to pursue that path to peace?
Well, we've had a year of war. Joe Biden sort of bookended that at the end by looking back on what Ukraine has achieved. We now have to look forward to the next year of war. I mean, the first thing we can say that history tells us that you can't impose a peace if there's no consensus on either side for that peace to happen. And that's certainly the case at the moment. Russia is not interested in pursuing any kind of peace. There's no off-ramp, as the phrase goes, for Vladimir Putin, not because there isn't one, but because he's not looking for one. He hasn't reached that exhaustion point yet, and he feels, just like Stalin, his predecessor, did, that he can spend more people than can Ukraine, and it's an awful thing to say, but there's no evidence that he cares about human life at all, his own or the Ukrainians. So until the Russian mentality is exhausted enough to want to come to the conference table, then trying to impose a peace from outside going to be very difficult. You'd have to have a huge demilitarized zone funded by the rest of the world at huge expense, possibly for decades, like the demilitarized zone in between North and South Korea.
But let's